October 19th, 2015. A nation stirred, restless for a new direction. Record numbers of citizens, fueled by a deep dissatisfaction, converged on the polls. The result was a political sea change. A new leader, Justin Trudeau, ascended to the office of Prime Minister. Before a sea of cheering supporters, his message rang out, simple and resonant. It's time for a change in this country, a real change. Across the vast expanse of the nation, a wave of optimism crested. This was more than an election. It was the perceived dawn of a golden age, a promise of affordability, of new homes rising to meet the sky, of a future secured. It was the reaffirmation of the Canadian dream, a quiet covenant of prosperity for all who called this land home. But the passage of time can erode even the most fervent of hopes. Today, that dream lies fractured. Housing prices have not just risen, they have spiraled into an unforgiving stratosphere. Food banks, once a last resort, now turn away the hungry for lack of supply. And in a stunning reversal, immigrants who sought refuge and opportunity are now leaving, their hopes exhausted. The dream has soured, revealing a side of the nation many never thought possible. In quiet conversations held across the country, a common refrain emerges, a profound sense of hopelessness. A generation raised on the vision of a modest life, a comfortable home, a safe neighborhood, a place to raise a family, now speaks of it as a distant fantasy. The arithmetic is brutal. To afford an average home, a family must earn $170,000, $160,000. This against a median family income of just $70,000. The numbers do not merely suggest a challenge, they describe an unbridgeable chasm. It was not always this way. There is a living memory of a time when a steady wage could secure a deed. But over the last few decades, a great decoupling has occurred. The value of shelter has accelerated far beyond the value of labor, forcing millions to abandon the hope their parents once took for granted. Even for the few who can enter this punishing market, the prize is often underwhelming. In Vancouver, an average house, a modest, unassuming structure, commands a price of nearly $2 million. For those who choose to rent, there is no escape. A confluence of factors, years of underbuilding, restrictive policies, and population growth, has created a critical shortage. The national rental vacancy rate has fallen to an all-time low of 1.5%. It is a market defined by desperation. A single listing can trigger a flood of hundreds of competing applications, transforming the search for a home into a frantic, soul-crushing competition. The nation has arrived at an impossible crossroads, a point where the fundamental necessities of life, shelter, food, warmth, are no longer guarantees, but competing choices. A roof over one's head now comes at the cost of a meal on the table. And so, the promise of a golden age gives way to a harsh reality, leaving a country to grapple with a profound question. What becomes of a dream when the dreamers can no longer afford to sleep? In the narrow spaces between supply and demand, a crisis is unfolding. A vacancy rate shrinking to near invisibility, has lit a fire under the cost of shelter, fueling a relentless vertical climb in prices. Landlords, seeing a captive market with nowhere else to turn, are raising rents not just to meet the market, but to extract its absolute limit. For some, the NARs per month. The outcome is a brutal mathematical certainty. Rents spiral upwards with no ceiling in sight. In the urban cores of Toronto and Vancouver, the price for a simple one-bedroom apartment now hovers near $3,000. After the state has taken its share and the landlord has taken theirs, there is precious little left. A quiet desperation takes hold. Meals are foregone. Second, and even third, jobs are taken. The family car becomes a bedroom. To bridge the ever-widening gap, debt has become the essential tool for survival. The nation's balance sheets tell the story. Canada now bears the third highest ratio of household debt to GDP on Earth. Compounding the struggle is a sense of abandonment, a feeling that the government is not only unable to help, but is an active participant in the hardship. The crisis of affordability is a complex tapestry, woven from the threads of federal policy and local inaction. At the federal level, the last decade has overseen the most dramatic surge in real estate prices in the nation's history. A primary driver is a historic shift in demographics. Since 2016, the government has welcomed nearly 3 million immigrants. This figure, a record in itself, represents an increase of 40% per year over previous decades. To this, we add another 1 million foreign students, each seeking a place to live. By injecting a population equivalent to a major city into an already underbuilt housing market, the government has squeezed the system to its breaking point. The economic principle is unforgiving. When demand is radically increased and supply remains stagnant, prices will rise. The pressure is not felt evenly. Most newcomers seek entry-level homes and apartments, the very same rung on the ladder sought by young and average Canadians. A fierce competition has begun for the first, most essential asset, a home. At the University of British Columbia, students unable to find housing now reside in vans, scattered across campus parking lots. Some wait more than a year for a space in residence. One student, in a feat of economic absurdity, flies in from another city for class, the airfare cheaper than the rent. Across the country, rooming houses have become commonplace, where a single bedroom might be subdivided for 5 tenants, a grim calculus of maximizing profit from minimal space. But to lay the blame solely on immigration is to ignore a deeper, more chronic ailment. Canada has been underinvested in housing for decades. One major bank estimates the country needs 5 million new homes by 2030 just to restore a measure of affordability. Developers are clear. That target is impossible. You cannot, after all, conjure homes overnight. And at the local level, a profound unwillingness to build has taken root. Citizens who already own property often stand against new development, fearing the erosion of their own asset values. The foundation of a society is the promise of shelter, a place of safety and stability. But when that foundation cracks, when the very concept of home becomes an unaffordable luxury, the social contract itself begins to fray. The question is no longer just about the cost of living, but about the kind of future a nation is building for its people. In the quiet ambition of a nation, the dream of a home has become a ghost, haunting the landscape of affordability. For those who own, it is a fortress of wealth, its value ever rising. For those who do not, it is a locked gate. The path to building more is a gauntlet of resistance. A chorus of local opposition rises to challenge nearly every large development, while the slow, arduous process of securing permits grinds progress to a halt. In the corridors of power, elected officials understand this calculus. Pushing for housing risks an electoral backlash, a price few are willing to pay. Upon this foundation of scarcity, a complex architecture of costs is built. City by city, province by province, a multitude of taxes are levied, stretching both the timeline and the budget for any new construction. In some urban centers, these fees can inflate the cost of a home by more than 20%. A burden passed directly from the developer to the buyer. This relentless pressure for revenue is fueled by a government that is expanding at a staggering rate. Between 2020 and 2023, the public service in British Columbia swelled by 23%. In stark contrast, the private sector grew by a mere 1%. This explosive growth in bureaucracy demands more taxes to sustain it. A similar pattern echoes at the federal level, where the cost of government has expanded by nearly $20 billion a year since 2015. And then there is the final unseen weight pressing down on the market, the flood of foreign capital. Canada, a beacon of stability, has also become one of the easiest places in the developed world to launder illicit money. A report, commissioned by the government itself, confirmed that vast sums from the black market were flowing through the nation's real estate, particularly in Vancouver and Toronto. The question was asked, what would be done to stop it? The answer was silence. The floodgates remain open. This crisis of shelter extends beyond the front door to the most basic elements of survival. Since 2022, the price of food has soared by more than 10%. In March of 2023, nearly 2 million Canadians were forced to turn to food banks, a record high, and double the number from just 4 years prior. Behind the illusion of choice in the grocery aisle lies a stark reality. A handful of corporations command nearly 80% of the market. Decades of government inaction on industry consolidation have cultivated a near monopoly, where profits can be maximized with little resistance. The most glaring example is bread, a staple of life dominated by just 2 companies. But this is not merely a story of inaction. In the realms of poultry, eggs, and dairy, government policy actively protects domestic industries from competition. This shelter from the market costs the average Canadian family nearly $450 a year, a sum that, for many, represents the razor-thin margin between paying rent and facing eviction. The narrative of government policy leading to higher prices is a familiar one. A carbon tax designed to address a global crisis has made the cost of fuel and home heating more expensive than ever before. Among the world's 7 wealthiest nations, Canadians now spend more at the pump than any other. The pushback has been significant, a rising tide of discontent from citizens and politicians alike. Even members of the ruling party have begun to speak out, as the volume of complaints from their constituents becomes impossible to ignore. A society is bound by an implicit contract, a promise of opportunity and stability. But when the cost of a home, the price of food, and the expense of keeping warm are all driven upward by the very systems designed to protect, that contract begins to fray. The distance between the governed and the government widens, leaving behind a quiet, gnawing question. Whose dream is this, and who is being left behind to pay for it? In the Atlantic provinces, a breaking point was reached. For communities reliant on expensive and carbon-heavy fuel oil, the cost of simply staying warm became unbearable. Under immense pressure, the government relented, carving out an exemption to its own carbon tax, a tacit admission of a policy colliding with the harsh realities of daily life. An official narrative emerged, one of rebates and financial relief, suggesting that most citizens were ultimately made whole, or even better off. But a starkly different reality was outlined by the nation's own parliamentary budget officer. The assessment was clear. When the wider economic fallout is factored in, the average citizen is left poorer. This financial pressure is not an isolated phenomenon. It is a symptom of a deeper condition woven into the fabric of the Canadian economy. Nowhere is this more starkly illustrated than in the digital lifelines of the nation, telecommunications. To ask if Canadians pay too much for mobile and internet services is to state the obvious. The country's wireless market is among the most expensive in the developed world, a market 7 times more costly than Australia's, and an astonishing 1,000 times more than Finland's. In a move that will be scrutinized, if not blocked, in most competitive economies, the nation's 4th largest provider was recently absorbed by its largest. The transaction proceeded virtually unimpeded, a testament to the deep-seated influence wielded by a handful of corporate titans. The pattern repeats itself in the bedrock of the economy, banking. It is a fortress protected by stringent regulations that favor entrenched, massive entities, making the creation of a new bank a near impossibility. With few alternatives, Canadians pay some of the highest banking fees in the world, an estimated $250 more each year than their counterparts in the United Kingdom or Australia. The reason is brutally simple: a profound lack of competition. The antidote to this pervasive expense would be a thriving, growing economy that generates high-value employment. Yet here, too, the vital signs are troubling. Since 2019, a troubling divergence has appeared. While the United States saw its economic productivity climb by 6%, Canada's has been in retreat. This decline eats away at wages and chips away at the quality of life, a slow erosion of national prosperity. The cause is a crisis of confidence. Private sector investment, the very engine of growth, is faltering. Canadian capital is flowing out of the country at unprecedented rates, chasing a simple calculation of risk and reward. Investors believe greater returns lie beyond the nation's borders, a reflection of dwindling faith in an economic climate perceived as inhospitable to enterprise. Beneath it all lies the same recurring theme. Key Canadian industries are controlled by oligopolies, a few dominant players with little incentive to innovate or invest in the disruptive technologies that drive productivity. In a protected ecosystem, there is no pressure to be better. And so, a nation of immense wealth and resources finds itself in a paradox, grappling with a system that seems engineered for scarcity, where the cost of entry is high and the rewards are concentrated at the very top. It is the quiet crisis of a closed economy, where the illusion of choice masks the reality of control. In the great economic crucible of the United States, low market concentration acts as a perpetual engine. It forces constant reinvestment, a relentless and unforgiving cycle of innovation, where companies must perpetually seek an edge or face obsolescence. But across the northern border, a different economic narrative is being written, one shaped not by market forces, but by government intervention. In Canada, the energy sector, once a titan of industry, has seen its foundations eroded by federal pricing policies. Since 2014, investment has plummeted by nearly $60 billion a year. One could argue this is the necessary price of progress, that the industries of oil and gas are relics of the past, and that a nation must future-proof its economy. It is a fair and forward-looking proposition. Yet the data reveals a troubling reality. Since 2016, the gross domestic product derived from Canada's technology companies has grown only with inflation, which is to say, it has not grown at all. Government efforts to incentivize a new industrial age have so far fallen short. The consequences of this stagnation are not merely confined to balance sheets and corporate outflows. A quiet exodus is underway, a drain of startups, of capital, and most critically, of human potential. Each year, 7% of Canadians look south, crossing the border in search of opportunity. The calculus is brutally simple. In the United States, jobs pay more, the cost of living is lower, and the economic landscape is profoundly more dynamic. The ultimate loser in this scenario is not an abstract government, but the ordinary hard-working citizen, whose life becomes incrementally more difficult. As national productivity declines, the central bank possesses less and less leeway to maintain lower interest rates, further tightening the vice on the cost of living. It is a slow-motion crisis, a gradual erosion of prosperity. And it begs a fundamental question. When the most ambitious and talented minds of a nation conclude their future lies elsewhere, what future is left for the nation itself?